So my name is Matt Herring. I am a music podcaster. I'm a writer, and I have had the pleasure of getting to know Chris over the last year. We're working on his biography and at least I'm having a great time. I don't know if you're having.
Too.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Poland.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
So, I know the answer to this, but you guys don't. So, what has been the most interesting part of doing Terrificon, doing this show? What has been kind of the biggest shock for you? In a good way, of course.
Oh, no, there's no shock. I meet so many people here, and it's just fun to be here, really. I mean, I'm having as much fun as you guys are. Walking around and meeting people and signing records. I've never even signed the top of a LP before, and I did two in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes ago. So I'm just having fun. I'm not shocked by anything except how many people are here.
Yeah, so for Chris and I met at a show, Northeast Comic Con. They do shows up in Boxborough, Massachusetts. So that's where Chris and I met, and it was sort of a music themed show. So as we've started to get going in our writing and the relationship, I was like, dude, you got to come to the show. It's called Terrificon, and most of the people here, they're metal fans. People know and understand, and just because it's comic book based. I remember doing a comic podcast and seeing people walking by with concert shirts and being like, oh my God, we know that band. And that was what made us want to do music. So you're seeing that. And the other thing that I've been really surprised at and enjoying quite a bit is the age group of some of these fans that are coming in.
Yeah, I just got back from Australia, and it's Dave Ellison, myself, and Jeff Young. And the age group there is the same. There's like 12-year-old kids wearing Peace Elf shirts. And it's just never going to end, which is great, It's just, I'm proud to be a part of that.
And how does it feel when you see somebody that their parents weren't even their age when the albums came out, and you're thinking, this house must be awesome because that's, what are we listening to when we have breakfast? Peace Elf produced by.
Yeah, no, it's pretty incredible.
So when you think back to all the years that you've been doing this, what are some of the things that you really think about that stand out as far as like what got you to that point? Like you've had again, I know almost everything about his childhood and the growing up and the things that have motivated him and influenced him to get there. But when you think about where you are now, what do you think was maybe some of the bigger influences that got you here?
Oh, I don't know. I just wanted. When I was a kid, I was playing along with records, and I had a little fuzz box that I could plug into my Sequel guitar. And when I could play like all my guys that I liked on records, I was learning Leslie West and Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and Allman Brothers. One day I just said, I'm going to do this. And then I just had that, I never let that go. And I still have it. I'm still... I can't help it. I want to do it. I love playing guitar, and that's what I'm going to
do. The whole thing about you just being, one of those, young kids that you were a prodigy, you had a gift. You absolutely did. You were at a young age playing with, you're 13, 14 years old playing with 25, 30-year-old grizzled musicians in Albany, New York. Your parents are letting you hitchhike from Dunkirk to Albany, which was...
It was a different time. I wouldn't, like, when my daughter heard that, she asked me if she could hitchhike to San Francisco. And I was 17 and she's 16, and I'm like, you're not hitchhiking anywhere. So, it was a different time, but I was lucky to meet those guys and get to play with them. They kind of molded my musical horizons. They turned me on to Tony Williams' Lifetime, and I actually think they probably turned me on to the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And it was McLaughlin that kind of changed my musical horizons, I guess. And Jimmy Page.
And you definitely had a really interesting musical path. Like most of the kids your age were, we talked about the fact that, some of your friends are playing Kiss, and you're hearing this going, I don't understand this. I don't know what you like about it. Let me play you some Santana. And they're listening to that going, I don't know what you see in that. So you were kind of definitely a little bit on the different side, but that's where I think all these guys like with Moon and all those guys that you started playing with a little bit later on, that's where it kind of develops.
Yes, I think so too. A good friend of mine in high school, his name was Bill Brazil, and I think I played him this Mon Richmond record called Birds of Fire, and he just looked at me like, why do you listen to that crap? My girlfriend at the time, I played her Return to Forever, Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy, and she's like, why do you listen to that Star Trek music? So yeah, and I felt the same way about, I mean, Kiss was a great band, but I was just like this. I just wanted to play guitar like these guys, and Kiss wasn't very challenging. They were just entertainment, They're great entertainment.
And then you ended up you were in Dunkirk, New York, and then you end up in California. You were working with and living with Gar Samuelson.
Yeah.
So if you're a Megadeth fan, Gar obviously was the drummer for Megadeth on the first two albums, the most important albums in the entire catalog for that band. And he went out there first with his brother. You go out there, and you hear the stories about all those backyard parties. Like Van Halen was playing these backyard parties, and you'd have thousands of people there. And you ended up getting involved in that with the New Yorkers, which was a jazz fusion band.
Yeah, and we were given that moniker by all the people in the area that had these huge backyard parties. They called us the New Yorkers, and we just went with it. And it's crazy. I mean, there'd be 1,000 people and 5 kegs of beer, and you could play, and the police wouldn't even close it down. It was a pretty cool time when we first moved out there, and we got a couple horn players, and we started to get really good. And then the Knack came out, and K-Rock got really big, and people's their tastes changed, and we were passé. Then came Megadeth, so me and Gar got lucky.
And interesting too, when we started writing and talking, and you were talking about the fact that the world of jazz fusion, there was a huge market for it out there.
Oh yeah.
And in my head, I'm like, I don't know if that seems right, because you can't picture jazz fusion. But then you look at what was on the radio at that time. So when I'm working and writing some of Chris's stuff, I'll throw on some of the music of the day to kind of get the feel of what I'm writing. And it's like all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I forgot. George Benson was huge. He was a jazz guitar player. There are different levels of jazz. Yeah. Chuck Mangione had one of the biggest hits of the 70s. These are all jazz players, so jazz was big. And did you think, before the Knack hit, all these metal bands were like, we're next, we're on our way, Van Halen's there, we're next. You were thinking that was a natural progression.
I think what happened was there was Van Halen and Motley Crue, and then there were all these copycat bands that were getting record deals, but were terrible bands. And that's what probably brought on Nirvana, because these other bands, it kept getting worse and worse and worse. But I don't know what we were thinking, We were like this about jazz, but I think what Gar brought to Megadeth is that jazz vibe, and even to this day, you got to give him credit for the sounds on the first 2 records, just the feel of the band. Nobody was playing drums like that in any of these other metal bands. They couldn't. They wouldn't even know how, because they didn't know who Tony Williams was, or Billy Cobham. I don't know if I answered your question. I think I was just scared of
Oh no, that's we're all just streaming consciousness here. And then, so when the New Yorkers broke up, and what I loved about the fact was, you guys were called the New Yorkers because everybody knew you were from New York. They're calling you the New Yorkers. Nobody's even realizing that you were in upstate New York. They're just assuming New York City. So that must have been, it's like somebody coming out from California and you're like, oh, the Hollywood guys.
Yeah.
No, we're like in 400 miles up the street. When all of a sudden the jazz thing ended, you started playing in like cover bands and just trying to do stuff to get going. And all of a sudden Gar joins Megadeth. Metallica hits, Megadeth is next. Obviously, if you know Megadeth, you know the history of how Dave Mustaine was fired from Metallica, formed Megadeth, putting the band together. Kerry King, who was in Slayer, filtered through for a little while, but there was never any plan of him ever staying permanently. And then 1,000 million guitar players and tried out singers, and nothing was working. And then Dave said he was going to sing, and you showed up. I love the story about how you got in. So if you want to share that.
Yeah, the New Yorkers had a manager. His name was Jay Jones, and Jay somehow ran into Dave Mustaine, and so Jay started managing Dave, and so it was Ellison and Mustaine. Jay Jones said, Dave said, I need a drummer, because I guess the drummer he had wasn't working out. So Jay, bing, I got the best drummer in LA. And so Gar goes down, gets the gig. Then Gar says, hey, we're playing the Waters Club this weekend. Why don't you come and check the band out? And so I did. And like Megadeth 3-piece doesn't work at all. But it sounded great. And then Gar told me the music's challenging, everybody's cool, and me and the bass player are a really tight rhythm section, which they were. Because Allison's like a machine. So he said, get your gear, come down to Mars rehearsal studios, because that's where Dave and Dave were working. Rent a room, turn your guitar up to 10, and play guitar for an hour. And if you hear a knock on the door, it's probably going to happen. I get the knock. Next thing I know, I'm learning songs, going to Mars every day, learning the first record. And I think maybe it was 2 weeks later, we were in the studio. And that's a crazy story. I can't remember the guy's name, but if it wasn't for him, I would have maybe done one solo on the first record.
Camilleri or something like that. It was
Phil Coltrari.
There we go.
Yeah, and he knew guitar, and he knew about Eric Johnson before anybody ever heard his name, And he brought down a Sundowner amp, which was an amp that Holdsworth was just being endorsed by. And I can't remember if I used that. I probably did for solos. But yeah, if it wasn't for Phil, I would have maybe even not done a solo. So that's just a crazy little story.
You were in for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden you're in the studio. You record, you put together the first album, and then it is, now the business of the business happens. You're, you're playing out. There's a major tour. You didn't end up going out on that tour. There were money issues. There were concerns that you had.
Yeah, they signed a T-shirt deal, and me and Gar weren't there. And it wasn't until they came back. They used a guy named Mike Albert, who was a really great guitar player in LA at the time. And when they came back, I think it was Dave Ellison that got a hold of me, because Dave would not do that. And he said, hey, the reason why we had to do that was because we needed the T-shirts 3 days, we were leaving in 3 days, or something crazy like that. I took him for honest word, and I said, okay, fine. And then I was back in the band. It was that easy, so.
And some of the things that I feel like I'm almost kind of skirting around things, because we've been writing a lot of stuff and getting things in there, and we don't want to give everything away. Not that there's anything major. You're not going to read anything and go, oh wow, they didn't mention that in the panel. Things like that. But there's a lot of really interesting things that go out, and if you've ever watched the behind the music that the Megadeth one, there's a lot of things in there that kind of put you in a bad light. And what we're doing in the book is really taking a lot of those situations, and I'm looking at it completely from the outside. I would talk to Chris, and he would tell me some of the things, because I'd say, hey, I remember this. And when I was a kid, I would be listening to P-Cells. I would have P-Cells on. I would have every magazine that had a Megadeth interview in there. I'd be reading it, and I'd be taking notes. So I pretty much have been doing this my whole life. So when I first met Chris, it was like, oh God, I've got 40 years of questions to ask him, which is sort of how it ended up turning into this book that we're working on. And one of the things that we're doing is ending almost every chapter with a thing called Truth or Death. And it's where Chris gets to finally put to light some of these things that Dave has said over the years, taking money for the advance on the album, which we, it's completely wrong on that one. Selling equipment, or taking the band's equipment to buy drug money, that's always a big one. When we've been talking about it, Chris has been explaining it like, oh, this makes complete sense, and it really makes sense to what is going on. And then when you get to know the inside of things and how they're going, it's like, well, this is why Dave would say these things. And it seems like a lot of the stuff was always sensationalized. Like, I'm a huge fan of the Sex Pistols. I love the music and the history. Not how it ended up for Sid Vicious, but everything was chaotic, where the bass player was like, look, I'm tired of this. I just don't want to do this anymore. I'm walking away. You can't just leave. We have to make this sensational story. Like, you like Paul McCartney too much. You watch your feet too much, and this and that. And he's like, I just want to walk. I just want to leave. So it seemed like Dave did a lot of that. Obviously we don't want Dave bash, but there was a lot of that going on.
Dave never thought before he spoke, and he would say stuff in the interviews, and I would just go, wow, he just said that. And like something that was totally like, I don't think it happened, And like Dave used to tell me, don't you dare tell anybody you like McLaughlin. If they ask you who your influences are, you say Michael Schenker. I'm like, okay. But, everybody here knows everything about Dave Mustaine. And what he says, what comes out of his mouth isn't what's important. It's all, it's dystopia. It's P-cells. It's the system has failed. It's like, if you didn't know all these things about Dave, maybe you wouldn't even like the music as much, because he's so crazy that that's what Megadeth is. It's just insanity, in a good way.
And it was, the music that was coming out at the time too, I love the story about how you came back into the band and you were doing sporadic shows here and there. Then all of a sudden it was 3 separate tour cycles before you even went in to record P-cells.
That's the secret of P-cells, is we were touring, playing those songs before we even recorded them. Grueling tours. And Ellison said this, we did a panel in Australia, and he mentioned it, and he's right, I remember this. Every time we did P-cells, when Gar started that kick drum, everybody would like look around like something's gonna happen. And then Dave started the bass line, and then everybody going, just totally, they were in it. And we could see they were in it. And by the time we got done with the song, we were like, wow, that's gonna be our song. And when we got back from these grueling, I think it was 2 years of grueling tours, we went right in the studio. So we were like a well-oiled machine when we went in, and it was like bam, bam, bam. Randy Burns had us working 16-hour days, and that's what happened. P-cells.
The thing that I've been doing as I've been writing, and it just really is showing the insanity of schedules back then. As we've gotten older, a lot of the bands that I work with, they'll do a weekend, and then they come back and take 3 weeks off. And then they'll do maybe a week and take a month off, because you can't do it anymore. And when I'm putting stuff together, like I would talk to Chris and come up like we just talked about. And I would get tour dates. So I would be seeing like, we entered the studio, Grindr? Was that where it was? Music Grindr. We entered Music Grindr in March. We started doing this. But leading into that, there were almost 35 dates from January 1st into February. 35, 40 dates. So I'm listing these dates so you could get an idea of, the clubs that they played. And then it was like, here's where we did this. And then, we cut half the album and we did this. And you guys recorded pretty quick.
Really?
But it was all of a sudden, it's like, okay, it's now April and we just finished 7 songs. We got 2 more to go or whatever we're doing. And then it's like another 30 to 40 dates all over the country. And you were recording and touring. And I'm writing this going, I don't even know how you can do this. You were living it.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about this right now. You know how bad you feel when you have a hangover, right? Well, we were on a permanent hangover. And everything else that you know about. And it's just the fact that we got through that is pretty much a miracle.
And things started to take off. So you had Metallica released Master of Puppets. And that album, and I was not a metal fan, or I was a metal fan, but I was not a thrash fan at all. So I wasn't into these bands. And then I remember I got Killing Is My Business, the first Megadeth album, and was like, this is way too extreme for me. I'm not understanding this. I don't get it. I'd rather listen to Asia, and I'd rather, those bands. Then all of a sudden, Master of Puppets came out, and I'm like, wow, this is a little more extreme, but has a really nice tone and a nice vibe and a nice feel. It's a lot different than the other stuff that's been coming out. And then Peace Sells comes out, and I am in. I am so in. Never even realizing what it was that I loved about the music. And I told Chris about a review that he didn't know about. Some lady wrote a review that said, it sounds like Megadeth were listening to the Mahavishnu Orchestra and the Sex Pistols before they went in and recorded this. And I shared that with Chris. He's like, who said that? And because that is absolutely it. And that's what I got into it. And then you find out that Chris and Gar were jazz guys. And then you start hearing that little kind of lazy snare and all these things that are this kind of jazz staples in the music.
Yeah, Gar didn't care where the one was. He would come out of fills. He would come in time, but he'd be well past the one. And that's why Ellison was so good about the rhythm section, because he was always on the one. So Gar had freedom to be, Jack DeJohnette. And, what am I saying? I wanted to say something. Man, I lost the thought. It was a good thought. Hopefully it'll come back.
We'll come back. So then the album gets released, and initially there was a pretty good buzz to it, because I remember all my friends were reading it or listening to it. All the magazines had ads for it. You were starting to see that little bit of a buzz. Nothing like what would happen 2 or 3 months later, where the album came out, and if you're old enough to remember MTV when they played videos and music news, MTV News, you hear it do first. And I remember hearing that and thinking, holy crap, that is Megadeth. It's in a commercial?
Yeah, I gotta tell you this story. Me and Dave Ellison and Dave Mustaine lived in a 3-bedroom, top floor apartment in Silver Lake. And it was a nice place. And I'm doing the dishes.
That's my favorite part of the story, by the way. I'm doing the dishes.
Ellison's doing something. He's laying something down on a small recorder, trying to figure out a song. And the MTV was always on. And I'm like, hey Dave, isn't that our song? And then 15 minutes later, it comes on again, and he looks at me and goes, holy shit. And you know what? That was so cool and so good for the band. But eventually, Mustaine had to, I think he asked for royalties. And as soon as he asked, they said, no problem. And they just stopped using it.
And the other cool thing about when the three of you were living there together when the album came out, they were on a small label, Combat Records, which was owned by Relativity.
Right.
So it was like a subsidiary. So you had a small company and a smaller company, and Megadeth was on there. They weren't getting advances. They weren't getting the money that they needed to stay on the road. Dave was calling up saying, hey, we're starving. We need food. We have no propane for the
That's Steve Sinclair.
And we need some money out here. Yeah, no. Why don't you just go get a job?
Like all our other bands.
Yeah.
And Dave was like, what?
So the band ended up, and it was a really kind of cool thing. Dave was listed as the co-producer, so he had rights to the tapes. So although Combat and Relativity owned this album,
Right.
Dave was able to shopped it to Capitol.
No, what happened was Capitol wanted it.
Yeah.
And what Capitol wants, Capitol gets. And they bought it from Relativity. I had no idea what they got it for, but I'll bet it wasn't $10,000.
And the cool thing about that, I talked to you and I talked to Dave Ellison about this, was the fact that when you got the actual vinyl copy and you put it on the turntable.
Oh yeah.
And the thought was...
It was the Capitol logo.
Yep. And Dave was like, both of you guys were like, oh my God, the Beatles are on Capitol.
Yeah.
And it was that same black label, because Capitol had a couple different labels that they were using. And the one that, when Peace Sells got released, was the original black label with the color swirls around it.
I signed one today.
And you've had a couple of those that have come through, so it's been great. So you're on Capitol, now things are a little bit different. All of a sudden now you're going into January and you end up on the Alice Cooper tour.
That was what broke the band. Yeah.
Yeah, and what was that like? You obviously being you were in the '70s music thing. You knew all these guys.
Oh, yeah.
What was it like for you to actually be on tour with Alice and see that show?
What was intimidating was how professional they were. They had it down, and they had semi after semi. Their guitar player had guys that would bring his whole gymnasium out and he'd be working out. And just everything was like tuned and timed to the second. And we were totally reckless and crazy. And like one day, here's what the problem was. On that tour, it was hurry up and wait all freaking day long. And then you get a line check. And that was our day. And then we get to play for 30 minutes. So all day long, we're just bored out of our minds. So one day, me and Gar find the room where all the actors for Alice spray their hair, with hairspray and put their makeup on. And Gar picks up a hair, spray can, and lights it and comes after me. So I grab one and I go after him. And we're having this battle. And somehow, the paper, cover on the table starts on fire. And I look at Gar and he looks at me, and it's covered in hairspray, so it's going up like crazy. And finally, we found water somewhere. We put it out, but as we put it out, we were leaving. Somebody that worked that room saw us, and that was the end. So maybe 20 minutes later, we're on the bus, pretending like nothing happened. Yeah. Hey, Dave. Yeah, Alice wants to see the four of you in his bus right now. I swear to God, Gar looks at me and goes. So we're walking in, and I'm walking, and I'm thinking, I'm not saying anything. I'm just like, and so we sit down, and Alice goes, hey guys, I just wanted to talk to you about something. I know what you're doing. I've been where you're at. I know it's fun, but you guys need to dial it back, like, a lot, or I'm gonna have to send you home. And Mustaine was like, I think Mustaine thought it was cool. Because I don't think he knew, now that I think about it, because I've been telling this story a lot. I don't think he ever knew what happened. Maybe not until a couple days later, and then he was just like, whatever. I think he liked it. I think he because he was the Sex Pistols fan. He was the guy that, when, we're all tired, we're touring, we're not sleeping, we're always drinking. Every night before we'd go on stage, we would play Fear as loud as you could play it in a Winnebago. And we'd play Fear, and then we'd play more beer. And by the time we got on stage, we were like just pumped. And that's how we got through all that permanent hangover.
And there was obviously a lot of drug use, a lot of things that started to get even worse as...
It was a lot of drug use, but only when we were home.
Yeah.
Because when you're in Poughkeepsie, you're not going to find anything. So in Poughkeepsie, you want to make sure that the rider brought your vodka, because that's the only way you're going to make it on stage. And then you had to time your buzz, because you couldn't drink a whole bottle of vodka because you wanted to, because you just wanted to fall down and go to sleep. So you'd have to take it, sip it, until the monkey, became like a cricket, and then we'd get through the set, and when we got home, that's when the drug use happened.
And it was, obviously, again, you're looking at that schedule where it's nonstop. And also, too, when you're, like what Chris was saying, how you have a 24-hour day, the traveling is rough, so you're not getting a whole lot of sleep, and then you get to the venue and it's a half hour. Like you're waiting to wait, and then you get in there and it's a lot of stop, start,
Yeah.
a lot of time to kill, but you're exhausted. I mean, it's that cycle, and by the time the tour started to wind down, which now it's April, May of 1987, the band is huge. And you think about the fact that if you were, again, a kid in the 80s reading all these music magazines, Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, and even Ozzy was now being replaced by Metallica, Megadeth. All these bands are becoming more popular. So this is now becoming the flavor. This is what everybody's listening to. Tour winds down and ends, and it's pretty much all over for you and Gar. But as a kid, I was always like, this is wrong, man. They screwed him over. But then as we've been talking and working on the book, you were more like, well, thank God it's over. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, no, it was like, there was relief that it was over, because it was just hard. It was hard work, and when you're in a band and, you're sober, it's not hard work, it's fun. But, when you're always at odds, and the one guy is the alpha guy in a big way, but all of us are alpha guys too. It's just this clash that never ends, and that takes a lot out of you, on top of, everything else that was going on. But that's the thing, though. It was Dave's vision. He was driven by hate, and that didn't help either, because he was just motivated from a really bad place, but it drove him. And, like, we would be in Winnipeg, we'd be going across the country, like, we'd had to do like a 20-hour drive or something, whatever. And we'd be sitting there, and we couldn't even move, We'd just sit there. And this thing would get up and go pick up something off the carpet and throw it out. And I'd be like, why did he do that? And that's the kind of, everything, he wanted everything to work. He was going to make it happen. And just when I saw him do that, I was like, he's just totally motivated all the time.
And so it's over. The whole thing is done for you with Megadeth for now. They release So Far So Good, So What. You take that time, you get out there, you get yourself clean, you get yourself right. And then a lot of people might not know this, but you got asked to go back by Dave to join Megadeth again.
Yeah, I probably would have joined that band, because the first person I met when I walked in the room to do the demos on that record was Nick Menza. And I remember he came up to me, he shook my hand with both his hands and said, "Chris, it's really great meeting you." And if I would have went and had lunch with him for like a couple hours, I think I would have joined the band, because then it would have been me and Nick instead of me and Gar.
Mm-hmm.
But I played the demos because, I told him, I said, you gotta come clean with me and Gar, you gotta give us, what you owe us. And he was, yeah, okay. And then my manager at the time, as we're driving to the Ivy to take, a meeting with Dave and his manager, and Andy Somers, the booking agent, my manager says, "I'm going to tell you this the last time," because she kept saying this, "If you join that band, you're going to die." Because she saw me, maybe a year before, walking out of a bus at the Santa Monica Civic Center, and she looked at Andy and she said, that's Chris?" And Andy goes, "Yeah." She goes, "He's going to be dead in a month." And that's how bad I looked back then. But anyway, by the time I got to the table, everything she had been saying for 2 weeks kind of hit me. And I just, on that spot, right at that minute, I said, "You know what, guys, I can't do this." And man, there was all kinds of anger. Ron Lafitte was pissed. He got up and stormed away, and I don't even think we ate dinner. I think Janie said, "Okay, let's get out of here." Because, you know what? I think they think I played them, but I didn't. I didn't play them. I just didn't want to go back, and I couldn't do that again. I would have died.
Yeah, it's one of those things like you can't go home again. And if anybody's ever had issues with drugs or alcohol, I'm 34 years sober and clean. You clap, but if you knew me then, you'd be like, "Oh, you're just a waste." But thank you. But you can't. You have to change your entire lifestyle. You can't. Like I was in a band and I couldn't go back. If I was gonna stay sober, there was no way I was gonna be able to do this again. All your friends, all your social circles, everything changed. I probably went 2 or 3 years with no friends because I had to rebuild my entire life. And for you, this was your livelihood. You couldn't just walk away. You were a guitar player. This is what you were. It probably was. I mean, looking at it now, you're realizing that was the best thing I could have done.
Right. Well, I've had my ups and downs. It wasn't beautiful the whole way, but I'd rather be sober than any of that.
Yeah. And then what I always think is the most interesting curve anybody's ever taken in music is for you to get back into the kind of the lifestyle and get everything going. You auditioned as a bass player for Circle Jerks.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was really fun. And it was embarrassing because I didn't have a bass. And there was a line of bass players at a place called Uncle Studios out in the valley in LA. And the only bass I could borrow was a pink BC Rich bass with a bolt-on neck. It was a total $100 bass. And it was bright pink. And it didn't have a case, so I couldn't hide it. And I'm standing in line, and this guy in front of me turns around and goes, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I'm going to audition with my pink bass." And the guy goes, "Why? Why do you want to play bass in the Circle Jerks?" And I said, "Because Andy Somers asked me to come down and audition because I told him I could do it." Luckily, I got the songs. There were 30 songs I had to learn. And me and my manager were going to Hawaii for like a week just to chill out. And I brought the bass with me, and I have, a little tape cassette player, and I'm learning Junk Mail and Casualty Vampire, and I'm learning all these songs. And after a while, I was like, wow, these are really good songs, So when I went to the audition, I knew the songs and I liked them. I wasn't just some bass player playing the songs whether I liked them or not. I really liked them, and they knew that. And that's how I got the gig. And then after I got the gig, I go out on the road with them. And I've been out on the road now with Megadeth. We got a gold record, we're in buses, and blah, 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 blah. I come home from my first Circle Jerks tour with almost $9,000 in my hand. And I was like, wow. So of course I stayed in there as long as I could, and because Sandra had went to join
Joe Strummer.
Yeah. So that was a fun time. I had a blast doing that.
And it's really interesting too when you can go on YouTube, and if you type in Circle Jerks Chris Poland, you'll get full concerts. And I was watching one of them because where we are writing in the book, we're kind of at this time period. We've just gotten done with Chris's grandparents, baby Chris, young guitar Chris's injury, joining all the way up here. So we're in that era now. So now I'm starting to watch all these videos of Chris with Circle Jerks, and I'm like, this is freaking out of control, awesome. Like, you're not just a bass player. You can tell you're a very well-versed guitar player playing bass lines. And it's funny because I was seeing some of the magazine articles about you joining. There was one that Kerrang did. And I remember as a kid reading it, because I used to love Kerrang magazine. It was a British magazine. The title of it was Mega Jerk. And I sent you, because I saw it online, somebody sent it to me, and I go, this is an awesome article. But I remember as a kid seeing that and being like, that's freaking rude. No, this guy's trying to fix his life. And
no, they knew that people were going to buy that just because it said that.
It was so good. But in the article, it was, I forget the lead singer's name, but he was saying stuff like,
Keith Morris.
Yeah, he's like, he's going to be awesome in the band, and we're really lucky to have him. But the second he starts playing metal bass, he's out, and all this stuff joking around.
He used to stop the band right in the middle of the song. Right in the middle of the song. And you go, all right, everybody, this is Chris Poland from Megadeth on bass. And if you see him going like this, if he starts pedaling, you point at him and let me know, and I'll stop again. Because in this band, we downstroke. And, he used to embarrass me on stage all the time. Those guys were crazy. They had a song called Killing for Jesus. And we're playing this huge club in New York. It was a theater, and I can't remember what it was, but it was the dead of winter. The stage and the floor are all covered in snow and trash from, a huge club with a lot of people in it. Even the stage is wet from people walking on and off with snow. In Killing for Jesus, Keith Morris made us, even the drummer, had to lay down because we're going to go to sleep now, because in the morning we're going to get up and we're going to be killing for Jesus. And so the audience would lay down in that slot. And I would look, and everybody's laying down because we're going to go to sleep.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe the control that Morris had over that crowd. It was insane. They were such a great band. They still are.
And I love the fact that when we've talked about that, and when I'm seeing some of the articles like later on or some of these later interviews, and what's great about, there's so many great things about YouTube, but when I'm looking for some other information after I talk to Chris or something to ask him, all you gotta do is go into YouTube and you find like interviews with Chris while he's on the road, talking about getting beat up, because you were playing these psychotic punching games.
Oh,
It was like you guys were like little kids out there.
No, they were truly punks. Yeah. They had this one game called Got In, and Got In is when if I'm in a city, I'm going, wow, that's a really big skyscraper. The drummer might come up from 5 feet away and smack me in the chest with his head, and that's how you could only use your head in Got In. But I had the right, if I saw him coming out of the corner of my eye, I could go, bam, right in his face. And that was one of their games. There was another game called the finger in the hole game. So if you went like that, and somebody put their finger in and got it out, they could punch you as hard as they wanted. But if I caught their finger, I could punch them. And I remember I was finding it was fun until one day, somebody got me so good that I got knocked down from the Got In game, and I was like, man, I can't do this anymore.
So when you look at the touring with Megadeth, everything was more on the psychological side. This is now the more physical side.
Yeah, no, it was a blast.
And so Circle Jerks are touring right now. They're with the Descendants, and I am so psyched to finally see them in September in Rhode Island, I think. And I was talking to the guitar player online. I forgot his...
Greg Hudson.
Yeah, so I reached out. I'm like, hey, I'm working with Chris on his biography. Do you think we can talk? And he's like, oh, yeah. So I am so psyched to talk to him to get some of these other stories. But really, really interesting. Like other than being a metal guy, and I love Barry Manilow, I was a punk. I love punk rock. 70s, British punk especially. Never quite got into the American stuff because to me it was a little more extreme. But bands like Circle Jerks, Black Flag, that's musical history right there. And I've gone back and just really appreciated that. So when you start looking at that and thinking your next step was this.
Mm-hmm.
So Milo's here. Milo brought a cassette of this to get signed. And it's so funny when you see cassettes because you think about how clumsy and bulky. There it is.
Oh, yeah, but nothing sounds as good, though.
Yeah, think about the noise. I mean, I think about the noise when you open the case, that scratching, and then you're pulling. It's like there's just so much magic in that. But tell us a little bit about this album because this was, it's interesting. There's a couple things that I found out about, like, this was inspired a lot by a lot of the things that you read, like Lord of the Rings, Vampire Diaries,
right?
Things like that. But it also was written while you were on the road getting beaten up by Circle Jerks.
Some of it was, and when we would stop, those guys would have, I mean, if I made $9,000, they made probably $30,000 a piece, maybe more, I don't know. And they would always stop at stores and buy guitars for half what they could sell them for in LA, like vintage guitars. So we'd be at a store for hours, you know. So I'd pick up a guitar and I'd work on, like, one song I worked on was Alexandria. I learned the chords to Alexandria waiting for them to buy guitars. And I would think about, and I had my tapes with me, and I would do arrangement ideas in my head while I listened to what me and my brother did on a little, 4-track. But this album was my interpretation of everything I had learned from Dave and Megadeth, which was a lot. He turned me on to Merciful Fate. Got just a lot of music. I can't even remember half of the names of the bands, but I wanted to do my instrumental jazz vibe thing with the Megadeth, low end and rhythm playing, and that's what I came up with. Was that?
It is an amazing album. If you're fans and you've never heard this, it's something you've got to listen to. I am somebody, and I've told Chris this before. I've also anybody I ever talk to that plays mostly instrumental music. I always tell them I don't really enjoy just instrumentals. I follow vocalists. I follow melody. I need that. When I got this album as a kid, I was expecting vocals, and I remember popping in the CD and being like, "Oh my God, if vocals were on here, it would ruin it," because this album is just so perfect. It's something you can put on to get fired up. If I remember playing hockey and putting it on and getting all fired up. And if you want to sit back and relax and just kind of groove and mellow out, it works too. It works on so many different levels. You didn't get to tour with this, did you?
Oh no, we
a
did
few shows.
We were out on tour with Death Angel, And it was a great tour, and they were a great band. And then they had their accident when we were driving. They hit black ice on the way into Vegas, and that was tragic. But that ended the tour, and then shortly after, we did a benefit in San Francisco for the band because they need money for the drummer's injuries. And then right after that, Enigma Records went bankrupt. And you can read about it in the book. But it was the end of this record. And it's a great story. It's worth, that story alone is worth reading.
Yeah, that's the business side. Like we've been talking a lot about those things, and when you were in Megadeth, you weren't really necessarily part of the business. Here was your money, here's your per diem, here's this.
Not at all.
This time you were,
Yeah.
this was all there. You were seeing how the music industry isn't a charity. It's all business.
All that business end I learned from Andy Somers and Jimmy Hoffman. You know, just being with them and seeing how they were working me, and I learned a lot from them.
And you see that. You would hear a lot from bands. Like this was also at a really interesting time in music. I was friends with John Wetton, who was in Asia. And when John put together his first solo album after leaving Asia, he was on Virgin Records. The guy who signed him got fired. And then they changed presidents. And basically, for some weird reason, rule is if you get fired from a record label, every project that you were assigned to, that was assigned to that person, is no longer there. So all of a sudden, John has an album ready to go out on Virgin, a lot of hype around it, and he now no longer has a record label. And you kind of carry that stigma. Mm-hmm. And this happened to you sort of like you started at Capitol, it ended up at Enigma,
right,
and then Enigma went belly up.
Yeah, it happens a lot, and you know, it's just, you know, the luck of the draw, I guess.
And you were at least able to walk away, like a lot of bands, unfortunately, from like I work with a band that first 6 albums were on Enigma, do not own the rights to any of that, don't have anything, so they can't even on their website. It's Stryper. I work for the band Stryper. So Stryper does not have the rights to their first 5 albums. So on the website, you just see a vacant spot. You'll see a bunch of live albums that have all the greatest hits on it, but you don't see that. You were lucky enough that you were able to walk away with the masters and maybe a little extra.
No, but we don't want to. So let's not get into that. If you guys want to learn that story, just grab the book. Read it at Barnes and Noble.
So moving into the sort of where we are now, you do Ohm is it's sort of, this is, to me, when I hear Ohm and see you guys at the watching live on see on YouTube and all live from the Baked Potato, Ohm, I didn't realize how big the Baked Potato was as a club. This is where everybody who's anybody plays. The music you're playing is not that much different than the music you're playing in New Yorkers.
Right.
And you're also playing with the bass player from New Yorkers.
Yeah. Yeah, that place, it says it holds 80 people, but there's, it's usually 100. And then now they opened up the back patio, so there's a lot more area. But it's the place in LA that like Mike Landau plays. He played with everybody, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, a lot of people. He's amazing. And Joey Bonamassa is playing there. Those guys usually play a Friday and a Saturday. But we've been playing there for years, and we hone our stuff there. We'll play it in front of our audience, and we know what songs are good and what songs are bad. But that's our haunt in Los Angeles.
And I forgot to mention too, the whole thing, like the music thing, like when Chris would talk about, and I'd even seen interviews, and there's a couple I've seen on YouTube, some old Megadeth interviews. You guys are sitting in a hotel room, probably all on the bed, and somebody would ask questions about, like, well, who are the people that were influencing you? And Mustaine would say, like, Sex Pistols and Merciful Fate, and those are the bands, and even Led Zeppelin. And then you would get over to Chris, and he's like, well, John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Santana, and you would see Mustaine like, what the heck? So the thing is...
That's actually my bedroom you're talking about.
That's your bedroom?
Yeah.
So the other part that's interesting it's funny now, but probably was a little bit not funny back then, was you guys would do a record store signing, you would get in there and you would clean out all the cassettes of music that nobody else would be listening. Like, we talked about like Peter Gabriel, Joni Mitchell,
Weather Report,
all
Forever, you know, McLaughlin stuff. Anyway, I'd go up in front of the Winnebago at night when Scott, our babysitter, would be driving, and I'd go, "Hey, where's that Weather Report record?" And Scott would say, "Dave threw that out the window yesterday." And that happened all the time, but I didn't really care because that would give me another reason to go to a record store at the next place we went to, because there was always one like walking distance from the club or theater we were playing at. So it was just like whatever. But I want to tell you about the my bedroom where the interview was.
Yeah.
The guy that did the interview walked around our place at the 3-bedroom place that Dave lived at, and everybody, their rooms were really nice, and my room was just a hellhole. And those guys go, "This is a room."
And it's interesting. I mean, you look back now, and I've heard you talking to people and about like current Megadeth and where they are, and you still listen and kind of keep up with what's going on, and people will ask you, and I think sometimes I've seen a little bit of shock because people will be like, what do you think of Megadeth now? Almost waiting for they suck, I hate them, I don't want to hear. And you'd be like, oh, I love Dystopia. That was such a great album. And shocked at one of the ballad that was on that. You were like, man, where did that even come from? You really appreciate music, and you appreciate your legacy. I know you appreciate the fans. Tell us a little about Kings of Thrash.
I want to just say, like with Dystopia, that's why Dave is, a genius, is because Dave's throat was messed up. He had cancer and he beat it. But his range, his vocal range changed. So he wrote that album around where his vocals were. And, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. But to do it and then make a record that good it's pretty impressive. But,
Kings of Thrash.
Oh yeah, the Kings of Thrash. Dave Ellison called me, I think about 6 months, maybe a year before I even thought about doing it. He said, "Hey, do you want to do this thing? We're going to do this and that." And I instantly said yes. And then he goes, "Okay, man, I'll get it going." And I hung up. And then I was like, wait a minute, I can't do that. I run these studios. I have a 16-year-old daughter. So I called him back and I said, "Dave, I can't do that, man." So we worked it out where I'm just a guest. And luckily I got to go to Australia for 10 days and do 5 shows there. And that was a blast. And then I did the record at the Whiskey. And if they have something on the West Coast, I'll go with them. Or if I can do a 3 or 4 day thing on the East Coast, I'll do it. But I just don't have the time to commit to that because, monetarily, it's not enough money to support me. But in the same, Dave Ellison is always working.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he does it. If he's not playing in the Kings of Thrash, he's playing with
He's with Overkill in South America.
Yeah, and he had 3 days to learn it. Yeah. I don't know how that guy does it. He's like a machine.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Like when Chris and I met about a year ago, it was at a show, and we started talking. And Chris's story is the one that I've always wanted to read. So to be able to sit and actually chat with him and write it has been one of the best times of my life. I have had an absolute blast doing this. And the fun part is, when I think about the show that it was, I got asked to do it, and Gary Summers, who's here, you'll walk down that way to the main hall and you'll see a guy with a Hawaiian shirt, big gray hair and a ponytail, and he'll be like, "Aloha!" That's Gary. So Gary asked me to do this show, and I'm like, I don't know. I just don't. It's a 4th of July weekend. I don't want to do anything. My job, I work for Amazon. I'm like, look, I'm just don't want to do anything. And he's like, well, I got the Megadeth guys coming. So I'm like, okay, I'm in. And then sat there, and the entire time, I would go over, my table was right across, so from Chris and Jeff Young. So Chris and I started just talking a little bit, and then we found out I did the panel. And then all of a sudden, the connection of the band UK, because of my friendship with John Wetton and Asia, all of a sudden, Chris was like, oh my God, can you tell me more about this? And then we just started talking about music and finding out, wow, this guy's way deeper than just dun, 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 dun. and then when we started talking, and I gave him my Black Sabbath book, and he came back the next day. He's like, "Hey, let's talk about some stuff." And in my head, I'm like, "Oh my God, he's gonna ask me to," like, I'm waiting for a date. I'm like, "Oh my God, he's gonna ask me if I could write his book. He's gonna ask me." And in my head, I'm like, "Don't get disappointed if he doesn't. He might just have a question for you."
Good idea.
So we started talking about that, and then here we are now, about a year later. It was July, so we've probably been writing since September, October. We're about almost over 100 pages in. Really excited about where it's going. Having a ball, and I know that for Chris it was a little tough because, it's like, hey, I know you got to relive some things that you don't want to remember, but let's talk about this.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of fun, and I think everybody, when they read it, you're going to enjoy it because there's some great stories in there. But it's a great story of somebody who was a music fan that just wanted to be a music fan, got caught up in things, cleaned everything up. And the way that I've kind of chaptered it is, it's life, death, DETH, because you obviously have to do that, and redemption. And it's living that redemption now of getting himself back, and it's just been great. So, what do you really, your hopes of, like, what people, when they read your story, what do you hope they get out of it?
They'll know everything I know about me. No, I think it's going to be fun to read because there's stories in there that only the band know, and I may have told people along the way, but they're pretty funny stories. And there's dark stuff. My life hasn't been, I've had moments. Everybody has, so you can read about mine.
Yeah.
But no, I've had a great life. I mean, I'm still, luckily I can still play guitar, and I don't have arthritis yet, and I'm having a ball.
Yeah, I think, and Chris was always, when we've been putting this together, he's like, it's got to be funny. Make sure there's humor in there. I'm like, how can there not be? These stories are out of control.
Yeah.
But what has been really cool, and I know we got to finish up and just let everybody know, thank you all for being here. Chris is here. When you walk, before you get into the main hall, he's on the right-hand side. It's like the last tables before you get out there. Please come by and say hello if you have any questions. That's been the best thing. Like, I'm sitting there with my ear like this, listening to every conversation, and hearing some things is like, oh, we're putting that in the book. But, just some of these things, like making it funny and having a lot of fun with it, has been great. And
we have a little piece of paper that has the QR code. If you come by and just grab that, you can watch our progress.
Yep.
So
I'm always putting stuff up, like, I'll be like a funny story, but the thing I wanted to mention too, this is great, last thing, was Chris will be telling me this amazing story. And I'll record the conversations. We'll talk on the phone for a couple hours on a Sunday afternoon, my evening, his afternoon. And he's telling me a story, and I'm like in tears laughing so hard at some of this stuff. And then he'll be like, and then, oh crap, I forgot how that ended. And then it's like, what do you mean you forgot? He goes, call Dave Ellefson. So
Yeah.
when I chatted with Ellefson, I spent almost 45 minutes going, okay, Chris told me this story about this and this and this. Oh my God, let me tell you. And he was able to finish everything, including looking at their itinerary. And I'm like, did you guys play in elementary school? And Chris was like, we did play in elementary school. And he remembered a little bit. And then Dave said, we played that elementary school twice, 2 separate tours. So he's given me more detail about like playing in elementary school. Going to get a drink of water and bumping your head because you're trying to get in that little fountain because it's for little kids. But again, thank you guys so much for coming out, and please come by the table, say hi to Chris. He's got his albums. We've got these awesome Funko Pops that we're thinning out of these because everybody's loving these. What comic book show cannot have Funko Pops? So
I got my Miles Davis one.
Yeah, yes. So again, thank you guys very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.